A very warm welcome to you, everyone. Thank you for joining today's session for HR Acers, which is our community for HR professionals. The session we have today is about becoming an HR professional that is future ready, and we have two very special guests for this. So, without any further ado, because of course, again, you're not here to listen to me speak, I'll introduce to you our moderator for the session today. So please give a very warm welcome to Gauri Das. Gauri is a strategic HR leader with 16 plus years of experience in crafting as well as aligning HR strategy with business goals. She carries a wealth of experience with both startups and well established organizations. She's on the advisory panel of various institutes and NGOs. She also loves writing, and her work has been published in leading publications, including the Times of India and the Economic Times. She supports businesses in setting the right culture, driving performance, reinventing employee experience, and improving capabilities, all of these in line with her passion for women empowerment. So please, once again, thank you so much, Gauri, for joining the session and for being our moderator for the evening. Any words that you'd like to say before we start?
Thank you so much, Arnav, for the warm welcome, and I'm looking forward to have a great conversation today.
Lovely. That's absolutely lovely. And now, without any further ado, I'd love to introduce to you our speaker for the session. So please welcome Dr. Shalini Lal, who is an organizational thought leader who helps leaders understand and prepare themselves for the future of work. In this capacity, she works as an advisor and speaker who addresses leadership teams of several of India's leading organizations. She is the founder of Uncube, an education and advisory firm around the future of work. Um, and yeah, so once again, absolutely great to have you, Shalini. It's an absolute honor to welcome you here. And any words before I give it over to Gauri to start the session?
Oh, thank you, Arnav. I'm so delighted to be here, both on behalf of the VAs community and to be in conversation with Gauri. So thrilled to get this started off.
Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. So I'll get out of the way and let you to start the session and take over. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Arnav. Hi, Shalini. I have been following your work, and it's going to be a great conversation today. So to start with, if I have to look at COVID, because that's the first thing which comes to our mind today, post-COVID times and pre-COVID times. So look at things from perspective of a few H. So the first thing that happened during COVID and post it was H for high tech experience, because as customers we were getting high tech experience and we started expecting it as an employee as well. The second thing was holistic wellness. We were only focusing on having good food at office, having that gym and club membership, but we were not even focusing on sleep or forget about all rest of the dimensions of wellness. But holistic wellness came into picture. Then came the harmony where we moved from work from home, we started settling down, then hybrid came. So just like there is whenever there is a dissonance or disconnect between mind and heart, there is always a cognitive dissonance. Likewise, we started seeing resignations when there was this disconnect between the team. Another edge which was introduced, I would say, was the silver lining when it comes to COVID, was humane. And people started having that empathy, and you talk a lot about empathy, so we will be definitely listening to that. So that was another edge, and we also had happiness, and that's where we are now seeing quietly quitting, because people want that balance, people want that space for themselves. So all these H is what how am I looking at the world currently. But when we started going back and the fear started waning down, what I'm hearing from my circle is managers are going back to old era. They want everybody to be back to office, and again the same rut of life the way we were living. While we said that during COVID everything is going to change, it's going to be a new world altogether, and your smile is telling it all. So how do you think that we should navigate this world post COVID? Whatever changes happen, whatever workplace things. I think all three W's change at that point of time, but we are now slipping back to the old zone. So how do you think we can navigate this through?
Some great questions there, Gauri. So, I mean, let me first start by the obvious one. The pull of the past is always super strong. We've all grown up in a certain environment, and for most of our careers, that environment has been an in-person, in-office environment. So we've learned leadership, we've learned management, we've even learned how to be a good employee in person, and therefore it's sort of understandable that there is such a strong pull back to where we were pre-COVID. However, employee expectations have actually shifted very significantly. And this is one of those things where there's no study, no worthwhile study that says anything else. So every study you look at, and frankly Uncube's own research as well, shows that there have been a few very significant changes in employees. The first, and you alluded to that in your introduction of what has changed, is just the fact that the place work occupies in our lives has shifted. So, there's been this sort of shift from our whole focus being to make a living to now becoming to make a life. But, I mean, it sounds like this is this fancy slogan, but actually there's a lot that's, you can unpack within this statement. So, for instance, when we ask people, compared to 2 years ago, how much more do things like your family mean to you? Or how often do you think about things like the meaning of your work, purpose of your work? How important is it for you that your work and the rest of your life are in harmony? We find that even at the frankly senior and top leadership levels, 60 to 70% people say that they think about these issues significantly more than they ever did in the past. So, there is this shift. It's very hard to ever, anywhere in life completely go back, because 2 years is a long enough time. So there is this shift in what's the place of work in our lives, and that's pretty significant. The other big shift, and they aren't entirely separate, they are somewhat connected, is we've had a taste of flexibility now. 2 years ago, when COVID struck, nobody imagined that so much work could actually happen in such a distributed office where everybody was working out of their own homes. We weren't even meeting each other. Everything was virtual. So I think for the first few months, it was almost like a surprise that, oh my God, so much actually can be done virtually. Nobody quite expected that. So the desire for flexibility is very, very real. And our own research shows some very interesting trends there. So when we interview people who are junior, mid, or even mid senior, the preference for flexibility now is anywhere between 80% to 90%, particularly amongst knowledge workers. Which doesn't mean that they don't want to come to office at all. It just means that they don't want to go back to the old rhythm of work, which was Monday through Friday in office. Uh, Even at senior levels, actually it's like it's a split. There are many senior leaders who have a very strong desire that work returns back to the way it was, and there are many reasons for it. There is a recognition of the fact that there are some things that have gotten lost over the last 2 years, and so that's a fairly fair recognition from their vantage point as an organizational leader. They worry about networks, how are networks expanding, or in fact, research shows contracting. People know fewer people in the workplace. How is culture going to get built? How will innovation happen? So there are all these concerns that are driving many of them to say, no, no, let's get people back. But at the same time, there are also many other senior leaders, actually even top leaders, who are saying, okay, this is a great time for us to experiment and try something different. So I think it's really hard to go back to the way things were, because 2 years have actually happened. They have happened, and we have changed in the process. So time never quite moves back in the exact same way. Even if we go back to the office, it'll take a different form from what it did before.
Absolutely well said. That cannot, we can never go back to time that has already passed. And yes, it is a well proven thing that things have changed and we have to accept it. But yes, like you rightly said, that there are certain reasons because of which people want to go back, and especially team manager, because managers are somewhere, it's like in between, they have to get work done, because no organization is running for charity, so they have to do things which are required for business, and at the same time they have to take care of their teams also. So lot of things are actually running on their shoulders, and HR as an enabler need to support these people, because for us it's like guiding them. HR cannot be omnipresent, so we have to enable these managers. So what do you think, Shalini, that as HR professionals we should learn in terms of management skills which are going to be helpful for us to support the business, support these managers?
Yeah, that's another great question, Gauri. So I'll say as HR professionals, it's like two different buckets. One is how we support managers, which is your question. And the other is what do these shifts mean for many of the other core HR policies? And I'll touch upon both. So let's look at the first. As you said, the role of the manager actually in a digital first workplace, which is where, we are, that's the shift. Now, whether it's a smaller shift or a larger shift depends on your organization, your industry, the founder's point of view. Many things might impact that. But are we becoming increasingly, a digital first organization? Yes, the world is headed in that direction. So what we've seen is that from the experience of organizations which have adopted digital first management, the role of the manager is far more critical than anyone ever expected. In fact, I do remember a conversation a couple of years ago which spoke about how the role of the manager is now, almost sort of fading away because of technology and how much can be managed by technology. But what we've seen in the last 2 years is actually quite the opposite. The manager has almost become the linking pin of the team with the larger organization. So Uncube did a study actually of 35 great managers who had the lowest attrition rates in their organization. This is for a leading IT company, to see what is it that they did differently. And we were frankly absolutely impressed by the lengths to which some of these amazing managers had gone to keep their teams integrated, not just amongst themselves, because that's sort of, the most obvious part, but integrated with a larger organization. And that's a new role for managers. So managers have largely focused on, getting the work done within their team, perhaps being a role model of sorts in culture, but they haven't quite been asked to play this role of link your team with the rest of the organization. And as organizations become increasingly digital, the manager's role becomes so central in this, because when organizations have tried to introduce other methods for linking team members with the larger organization, they really haven't worked so well. So people don't go for, or not enough people go for town halls, not enough people go for HR sessions, etc., etc., but they listen to their managers. So they are getting their cues for what is important from the manager. So there are many new roles, for a manager. And I'll give you some examples. Like, for instance, linking team members in your own work group with team members in other work groups, right? This is not something that managers have ever needed to do in the past. It was something that just happened organically because, you were sort of co-located, working in the same physical space, so people got to know each other. But one of the things we've discovered is that network sizes, which is the number of people you know within the organization, has dropped 20 to 25% on an average. And this is particularly true of junior to mid people. The other thing that's happened, and this is particularly true for new joiners, but it's true for many early careers, is that because people have been so focused on the work that's happening within their immediate work group, they've lost sight of what's happening in the larger organization, or how is their work connected with the work that's happening in the larger organization, or even with the adjacent team, etc., etc. So making those connections, helping people build this, larger mental map of the organization. What does it stand for? How does work happen here? How does my team's work connect with somebody else's? All of these are new roles that managers will need to increasingly be both trained to do and supported to do, because it's an unrealistic expectation to expect that all of them will somehow, overnight figure out how to do this on their own. That's not going to happen. So there are these whole new, and this is just the start of it, but there is this whole new set of skills that managers are going to need, which HR and business leaders will need to enable managers for. First, recognize, understand, and enable them for, both with training and other support systems. But then there are far more interesting questions ahead. So when we think about, what the future workplace can look like, there's no will, because God knows what the will be, but can look like. We see many more interesting forms of both, work arrangements. So, the most common way in which we've spoken about hybrid or hybrid is spoken about is 2 or 3 days in office, 2 or 3 days at home, right? But in fact, particularly in India and particularly amongst, some industries, that isn't a very likely, future if a large number, say 50-55% of your workforce have moved out of the metro city where your office was located. So if they're going to be located in, a smaller town, it's not very likely that they're going to come to your campus for 2 or 3 days a week, right? So we're going to see some newer forms of, almost how do we divide our workforce into those who will be more often remote and those who will be more often in the workplace. That is going to open up a whole new range of questions around HR practices. And, some of them are like so nitty gritty. I'll give you an example. One of our client organizations, leading IT firm, at the time of year end, we were speaking to the leader of the finance and accounts department. And one of the things this organization was very proud of is that through their history, they've been extremely prompt with accounts closing, right? And one of the ways that they've done it is that typically they've had a core team of 50, 60 people almost camp in office for 2 weeks, so that, it's super sensitive information. They want to make sure nothing leaks out. So that was how they always did it, and it was super successful. Of course, when COVID happened, none of that was possible. With the same efficiency, it did happen remotely. But the leader was saying how much he missed that time when there were 50, 60 of them. It was such a bonding experience, and, they all worked so closely together. He spoke about how he tried very hard this year to call in those 50, 60 people into office. And you know what? They were quite happy to come for 2 weeks. But you know where the question got stuck? Any guesses? Who will pay? Who will pay for their travel, or who will pay for their accommodation? Because on paper, they were supposed to be operating out of that big metro town. But in fact, nobody was there. In fact, they'd all moved to their, hometowns. So the matter got stalled on this very basic question of who's going to pay for travel, who's going to pay for accommodation. And look, this is a commercial decision at the end of the day, and every organization will need to weigh the costs and benefits of this approach versus that approach. But these are some of the questions which, as HR people, we've never really had to figure out, right? Or the very thorny compensation question, are we going to, how much of our pay is going to depend on location, which has typically been such a big determinant. So, there are a lot of interesting HR questions that haven't been perhaps as necessary to address in the past that are coming up now. So for HR professionals on this route, there are, you'll be addressing questions that for which there is very little precedent, and which means a lot of application of, our own minds, putting it together, maybe experiments, pilots in smaller teams to see and understand the implications of some of these strategies. So it's a very fertile space for those who like fertile and uncertain spaces. It can also be quite annoying for those who, are much more comfortable with the familiar.
Thanks for sharing this insightful research and beautiful message through this wonderful story, Shalini. That this is how things used to happen. I could relate so well that this is how things were happening earlier, and now it's like everybody is happy at their places. and what's going to happen in terms of commercial calls. And love the term when you said that managers are a connecting pin. They play a very very important role. Our viewers, the message from Shalini is very clear. You have to experiment, because, and I loved her humility also when she said, we do not know how will it be. We can only say how can it be, because no one has all the answers today. So be ready to experiment, fail, unlearn, and relearn. That's the message. Shalini, now we are talking about this hybrid work, but I am reminded of my own early days when I started working and I had a remote manager. And this was very early time of my career. So I was doing leave and attendance management, the administrative part of HR operations, which we say is of no use. But if even for a day salary is delayed, everybody just pounces on HR department. Why has it happened? So though people don't understand the value of HR operations, but it's extremely important when it comes to employee experience overall. So I was doing these things, and I would be at the end of the day, I would be like, what do I do here? I mean, nobody even cares what I do. If I don't do something for a month, is there anything going to change? Is my work even worth it? And why this thought used to come to my mind more, because I had a remote manager. So now there are so many people who are working in this setup, and machines are already taking over, and we always think, would I be required to do this tomorrow? So in such a scenario, how do we tell our workforce that your work is worth it?
Oh, wow. What a great question, Gauri. There's no very easy answer. I think we are seeing increased automation. That's the reality. World Economic Forum data suggests that something like 85% of organizations have accelerated their automation digitization plans. Obviously, that's no surprise. When COVID happened, it was just so much easier if you were tech enabled than if you were not. So that lesson of the importance of tech enablement, I think, was very very stark. So we are going to see a lot more automation over the next few years, and some roles where they're predictable, standardizable, uh, are therefore going to get automated. Of course, then that gives us the very interesting opportunity that the roles which are going to be played by humans then almost become more and more human. For the absence of another word, I don't want to say humane, because humane means something pretty specific, but they become more human, because the stuff which you can automate and just put in an algorithm moves there. So the parts where it's understanding, like in your case, the example you gave, like if your salaries are delayed by one day, just understanding, what people will be going through, and being able to, find ways to address what will create a tremendous amount of anxiety in an organization. That's a human response. That's not a tech response. So, we are going to see that. I'll also address, you spoke about, you asked that question more because your manager was remote. And that's a very good observation, because when you are working remotely, uh, there is a reality that you need a little more, um, there are certain types of roles where you thrive better when you are remote than other roles. Like, for instance, where it's me working by myself, it's a little bit easier for me to thrive than if I need to be in constant interaction with people on the spot. So there are roles where you do better, um, you know uh, working remotely. But the other question which you said, because you don't meet your manager enough, back in the day, our understanding of how to do remote well was not very much, frankly. It was very, because it wasn't common, right? People didn't know how to do remote well. What we are discovering now is that doing remote well actually it's almost like, you're both more technical and more human at the same time. There is a technical part of the manager's job, understanding, okay, how am I multimodal? What should happen in person? What should happen one on one? What should happen in the team setting? So there is almost this, division of tasks of a manager, and matching them to the appropriate medium and the appropriate format. So there's that technical part of it. But the other part is, how are we immensely human If our interaction is, in person, maybe 10% or 20% or whatever you want to call it, say 30% of what it used to be, how can we get good at very quickly building relationships? How do we get good at building trust in short amounts of time, or helping people learn in short periods of time? And that's where this whole new set of skills comes in. um, Researchers at MIT call it the whole suite of immensely human interactions, which is how are we genuine, warm, empathetic, like real. And this is a cultural trend as well. Sort of our format of what counts as professional conversations have shifted over the last 2 years, if I may say. So, say, or if you want an even more stark example, let's take, say, 10 years ago, the expectation was that, to be professional, you behaved in a very, there was a very narrow range of behaviors that was acceptable under the umbrella of being professional. Today, that's broadened quite a bit. More in some organizations, less in others, but it's broadened quite a bit. You can be far more like normal, and that would be fine as a way of being professional than it was in the past. So there are some of these nuances to being a remote leader, or actually an, which are very true for the world we are moving towards, a more digitally enabled workforce. How will that work when our own interactions are that much more human, so that we are able to build our connections, trust, share our knowledge, brainstorm, come up with ideas, innovate in much shorter periods of time. And that requires keeping it real.
Absolutely, keeping it real, and you explained it so well. And I'm reminded of I am in banking industry for quite some time now, and I'm reminded of time 10 years ago, like you rightly mentioned, how people would always be wearing blazer and tie, and today things started changing. And I could relate to what you said when COVID hit and we were operating from home, and the first question would be, "How's your family doing? How's your spouse doing?" It was a shock for some people, those who had that traditional mindset, because in banking you don't bring your, you keep your professional and personal work totally separate. And I'm sure we would also be wearing a blazer today if things were
Yeah,
not changed. The
yeah.
set of behaviors, we would not be smiling this much, even that was not very welcome behavior at that point of time. Yeah, thanks for sharing this. And I must say, Shalini, Uncube is doing a wonderful work in terms of research, but you are also a research machine, I must say. You remember so much data, and you are bringing it all here for our viewers. Thank you so much for doing it. Now, tell
Oh,
me
I
this, Shalini. We are talking about multiple wellness. We are also talking about the most important one for Alpha and Gen Z today is the spiritual piece of overall well-being. Now, when it comes to spiritual well-being, we want to know what is purpose of life, and just like that, we want to know what is purpose of being there in the organization. What is the purpose of organization, my team, me? We all want to understand that. And say for example, even if you are directly contributing towards say somebody, I'm again taking banking example, you are lending money to MSMEs and you are actually helping in job creation, you are actually helping in trade, you are helping economy. Yet at that level, being a very small part in the system, you are not sure if it is and if there's anything which you are doing and it is adding to the whole purpose. So how do we help these people understand the purpose, introduce this purpose to our organization's purpose to people, and make everybody's life purposeful?
big one. So I think first I'll listen, your observation is absolutely true. This is a question which more and more people are asking. And, just so we do a lot of top leadership team conversations around future of work. As you can imagine, a lot of top leadership teams are trying to figure out, okay, what form and shape might the future take? And this is a question we ask in, senior and top leadership teams. We tend to do a pre-survey and look at the data, which the leadership team itself, what are you saying, at least in an anonymous pre-survey? And we do find that even right at the top, uh, this whole question about, what's the meaning of my job? What am I really doing here? How is my work contributing? Is it contributing to something bigger than myself? it's become far more important than ever. And I think one of the things we somehow just haven't addressed often enough is the reality is we've been through a pandemic and it isn't over as yet. Uh, you'll find it hard to find anyone today who has not known someone who's gone through tragedy. It's very hard to find someone today. So we've all been impacted by it and have, consciously or largely unconsciously, perhaps started asking these questions a lot more. So, how does one deal with it? Now, there are two good ways that we have discovered. Maybe there are others that we have yet to discover. But the first is this whole piece of, for organizations that are very oriented towards actually helping build a better world, you would imagine that employees at junior, mid levels automatically are aware of that. Uh, our own research shows no, that's not the case. We did this for actually a leading organization which does amazing work for India, actually. But when we asked people, what is the work that your organization has done over the last 2 years, very few people had anything but the vaguest idea. So that's the reality. When people have worked remotely, they've largely focused on what's happening within their work group. And unless an organization really talks about it and say, okay, we opened this, at during the Delta wave, we opened this whole, COVID cares and we did this, we did that. Unless you speak about it, chances are a lot of people aren't even aware of it. They actually aren't. And this was a surprise to us as well, because this is an organization which does a lot of good. The other thing is any organization which encourages volunteerism. So, one is how does my organization contribute, right? The other is how do I contribute? So, any organization which encourages, volunteerism. Now, whether that's through you get X number of volunteering days for ABC cause, so that you get to experience for yourself in a very personal capacity the act of giving back, whether it is planting trees or working in a shelter or you know, creating, shelters for homeless, whatever you pick that up. People who volunteer have a much higher sense of belongingness to the organization. Isn't that interesting? And part of it comes from the fact that they are seeing or having this experience of giving back and being connected to something that's larger than themselves through their organization. So there are two very good ways, and HR can actually play a pretty critical role in both. One in enabling the communication, and the other is in perhaps introducing a volunteerism program.
Yes, I agree fully, and they actually help a lot. I think the one who is giving, the giver gets benefited, and that's how you are here, Shaliti. So it does happen that we support communities in whatever fashion we are able to. And post COVID, many people have picked it up, and they are actually seeing that that is most important part of their life now. They are mentoring students, they are mentoring communities, and rest of the volunteering work also. That has a very very important role to play today. Thanks for sharing that. So Shali, you had mentioned digital first world. Now when we work from hybrid, I am reminded again of a friend who joined a very large organization, a large IT organization in India, and would have around 200,000 colleagues overall. He was in the system for 1 year and 9 months. For IT, it's a good number. But by the time he exited the system, he had known only four people. It's all he came when COVID was at its peak, and he exited also during that time. So only four people from 200,000 people. And the next thing comes, if you don't meet with people, how do you understand culture? Because culture is not something which is written in the handbook, it's all you observe. Right? And that's why we always say, if you want to know the culture, you have to look at people, how do they behave. So for him there was no such opportunity. And here is the million-dollar question, because without culture nothing is going to work for organization. Even top three things that we see even in startups, one of them is culture, other than the vision and the capacity to execute. So what do we do about this digital first culture? How do we create culture when all of us are operating from anywhere? There's so much flexibility, and it's all digital first.
You know, there's so much that's new that we are just discovering. And so we are really like at the start of this discovery. But I'll tell you what are some of the things we absolutely know. You know, your example of your friend who knew only four people. By the way, this is quite typical. If you take any of the large IT players in India today, um, anywhere between 40 to 60%, or sometimes even more, of the organization members they have today are new. They joined through the pandemic. So, there's a very significant size of the organization which has not necessarily met anyone in person. And the way work has been managed over the last 2 years, simply because we didn't know any better, frankly, was that, okay, this is the job. These are your 5 tasks, and you have to do those 5 tasks well, and that's it. One of the things that we're discovering is it's good. It's important to build social capital for individuals and the organization. So Anku had done some research about how the capacity to do this changes for people who are new joiners and early career versus those who have experience. One of the things we found was that new joiners who were mid to senior level, so had worked for say 10, 15 plus years, they didn't have these challenges because when they came in, they had already got a mental map of, okay, large IT services company. So, this is my role. I need to meet A, B, C, D kind of person. And they already almost had like a 90-day plan of, these are the top, whatever, 40, 50 people I'm going to seek out appointments with and meet them. So mid, senior, and above, because people had enough experience that they knew who they should ask to meet. They knew that even meeting people outside their work group was important, and they quickly set themselves up on the task. So mid to senior people know how to do this. Junior, particularly entry level, 0 to 7-ish years, people didn't know that this was even a thing for the most part. We found that almost like 90% of people stuck with their own work group. Even the idea that it would in some way be helpful to seek introductions or meetings with people across other work groups, that idea also was, unfamiliar. Nobody knew this idea. So one of the roles for managers, HR leaders, business leaders is integrating new joiners. And that needs to happen very differently now. Because unlike the past, where you were probably like, everybody's on the floor together, new joiners don't have that opportunity necessarily anymore. So, how do you integrate new joiners? Now, some of the things I spoke about earlier. This whole piece of encouraging connections with other work groups, both so that they meet the people, but also so that they understand what this organization is about. So, that's really helpful. Now I'll come to the other part that you said. How do we like transmit culture? Because this is a key area of concern for leaders, right? So many leaders are concerned for the right reasons. Earlier you just had to watch us and you would understand the culture. Now you can't watch us. So how do we transmit the culture? And the answers for this, to be honest, are still just starting to come. But if we look at what some of the fully remote organizations have done. And GitLabs is, for instance, a really great example. They went remote in 2014. So they've had now whatever 8-ish years of experience of being remote. They publish actually a remote, what's it called, the remote work handbook, where they detail out how do they, as a fully remote organization, how do they build culture, etc., etc. Is this whole combination of some in-person meetings, still very important, with a far greater emphasis on talking about things. If you can't observe me, can I at least tell you what I did? The story of what I did? Can you, at least hear about it? To living those values day to day by recording a lot. So, fully remote organizations, interestingly, at least the ones that have emerged so far, are documenting far more of what is actually happening, because they know that people, won't have access to, that richness of information if they're not in office. It's a lot more documentation. It's a lot more documentation of formal as well as informal conversations. So these are some of the things that are happening. It takes almost a shift in the way we look at culture building, when culture has to be built long distance or in increasingly remote, or digital settings.
Yes, absolutely. So many things are coming new. We never thought about moonlighting. We never thought about quitting. We never thought about great resignation, mortality. Nothing, none of these terms were ever known to us. So we have to keep learning. We are in an era where there is no handbook to refer to. So new
Yeah.
handbook has to be created. And like you rightly said, if I can't observe you doing things, let me understand from you in a documented form. So for us, there is an opportunity to learn from your extensive experience, Shalini. What would be some of the best practices that you have seen in your practice that future ready organizations are already employing and you think our viewers should know about them?
Um, so I think the first is flexibility, because the future can look quite different. So, for instance, some of the large, and now banking. Let's talk banking, because banking is so traditional as an industry. I was moderating a NASCOM conversation on future of work with Standard Chartered, Deutsche Bank, and Zoom. So Zoom, you can almost guess what their like path will be. So I won't talk about Zoom, but let's talk about the other two, which are very traditional organizations. And the participants on that were the future of work heads of both. It's in the public domain. It's also on my LinkedIn profile. So if anyone just wants to hear that conversation, you can see the YouTube video. What's so interesting is this whole, you know do we necessarily have to have, for instance, the same work arrangement for a large organization where different parts work quite differently? So the needs, for instance, of one team and another team can be quite different. So true of banking, right? Retail versus other forms of banking. Within IT services, IT services is an ocean. There are right from absolute operational roles to roles which are about innovation and architecture, and so there's this whole range. So this whole flexibility in now, let's start thinking of what if we were to do this from first principles, something Elon Musk speaks about a lot, right? Can we build something from first principles? Given the nature of work that this team is doing, what would be a good way to organize? And having the capacity to ask those questions. By the way, these are very scary questions to ask, because there's nothing familiar. So I'm saying, for a moment, if for nothing else, at least as a thought experiment, just put aside what you've seen in the past, because the way the world is changing, there's we're going to see 100 years of tech change in the next 4 years. By the way, this is from Future is Faster Than You Think, Peter Diamandis. So when the world is changing so fast, it's like you're taking an ambassador car and expecting it to be a race car. It will not. You need a new car, right? Now you have the opportunity to design that car. So one of the traits, again, it's not the whole organization. It just means a few people at strategic levels in that organization are at least asking the question that, okay, if for a moment we do a thought experiment, how can we have completely different work arrangements for different parts of the organization? Of course, now that's also going to mean your capacity to work with some of the new challenges that's going to throw up, like the fact that given the very significant employee preference for flexibility, how are we going to manage within an organization people's perhaps preference for some kinds of roles, some kinds of teams versus others? And that's a new challenge, and I think it's a challenge we will be seeing actually increasingly. So to your question, what is the trait that I've seen? I think this whole understanding the significance of the moment. a moment when there's so much in flux is also a very fertile moment. So instead of trying to go back to the familiar and the way things were, because you know that world, you know the challenges, but you know how to manage those challenges. Having almost the courage to now say, okay, let me just keep that aside, and what can happen now that we have the opportunity. So I think that's the biggest one, actually.
Yes, so like you said that you have to experiment and identify how things can work, because the moment you give flexibility to one team and you don't give it to another one because of their nature of work, the question would be there is discrimination, and then the whole lot of things would start. So yes, you rightly said, before taking a step we have to be thinking way forward what all can happen, and then there are experiments. It's like same thing, learning, relearning. But yes, thanks for sharing this, Shalini, and I would love to have a very, very long conversation with you. It's amazing learning from you. But we have a lucky winner now, and I don't want to eat into her time. So I would be handing over to her now to bring our lucky winner, Sheila.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Gauri. And I welcome you, Sheila. It's a privilege to have you. Please go ahead. This is a one on one interaction that you won with Shalini and, of course, Gauri. So go ahead, address your question.
Sure. Thank you so much, Arnav.
Hi, Sheila.
Hi. Am I audible clearly? Yeah,
Absolutely clear.
thank you so much. I'll take a quick minute to introduce myself. This is Sheila Munaswamy. I work for Intellect Design Arena. It's a product organization, fintech in the banking space. And I kind of head organization change and learning, and I also lead the HR business partner role operations. It's wonderful hearing both of you after a crazy week so much. One thing personally I realized is I've forgotten to write fast. So much information Shali was sharing, so many inputs. I think I'll have to go back and rehear the recording because I miss noting. So that's my personal takeaway. But I particularly like the way some of the questions, and of course Gauri is someone who had been following for long, so I'm not surprised she had the right questions. You had actually taken some of my questions, so it was wonderful to hear that as well. So I particularly like the way you said, if you are challenging yourself for uncertainty, then you're in the game. And as HR, I think we're all have to sign up, and the pandemic has completely changed how we looked at jobs earlier. And lovely insights. I love the purpose of work. And one thing that is so comforting to hear is that not all jobs are going to be automated. The complex human nature of work is going to be sustainable, and I think we have to evolve ourselves to be able to meet up to that challenge. Thank you so much. Lovely hearing it. So I have two basic quick questions. One is very tactical, larger in terms of how the future of work is changing, and one very personal. So the first question is, given I work for the product organization the last 2 years, what had been my personal experience is that so we have a lot of technical expertise who have grown to a certain level in their technical expertise, but not so much on their ways of communicating. It just happens that they were so much into the room in the design lab trying to crack complex solutions, and everything was working smooth. Now in this whole virtual setup, right, we suddenly realized that we kind of picked them up to an environment where now today this whole communication is kind of becoming more important than their technical expertise, right? They be able to be conveying to their peers or to the managers or to the SMEs. That's become very important. And personally, as a HR in my organization, I'm seeing that today I need suddenly see a need for in the larger population to upskill their communication, right? So how do we, and secondly from a manager's perspective, right, suddenly there's a lot of expectation in terms of having empathy. A lot has changed, a lot has evolved. So how do I address this challenge? How we cannot be doing a across the organization training at this point in time, right? So it's a very tactical question, but please help me understand.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I can see the dilemma. So I'll say there are two things. One is I'll reference because you spoke about your organization and the challenge you're having with technical people. who now need much higher levels of communication skills. So one project that we had done actually for another, large IT organization was on how jobs are evolving, and to your point of what jobs might look like or are likely to look like, say, 5 years from today. One of the things we discovered was that um, even technical jobs become far more multifunctional. So it isn't just about the technology. As you get more senior, it's about understanding the technology, but also understanding the customer, the ability to work across multiple teams within your organization, the capacity to lead a team in innovation and coming up with a new response which might suit the customer's needs better. So roles are becoming far, far more multifunctional than ever in the past. So while technology takes over, a certain class of jobs, particularly those which are predictable, repeatable, algorithmable, if you like, uh, for humans, the jobs become much more complex and they involve actually skills from many different fields. In fact, when we were writing some of the job descriptions for senior leaders, we were joking, and so was the organization. It sounds like Superman because they are so much more complex. It's about understanding customer, understanding where the industry is headed, where technology is headed, being able to interpret those requirements, lead innovation in that space, work across different teams. So, it's just the basket of skills is much higher. So I think just as this is slightly more long term, but at an organizational level, mapping how roles are going to look like. Because nothing is as strong an incentive as my seeing that my role is only going to go so far if my skill is only technical, which is what the reality is today. The senior level roles require they are multifunctional. So now I have to start preparing for those roles very differently because in the past they were not needed in that,
Right.
with that level of proficiency, or not that many of them were needed. Just a few of them sufficed, which is not the case. So that's one. The other part is it's a reality. I think we do need to, at least some things will just need to be role modeled by those who have them in the organization. So even if you have a few senior leaders, who have that capacity for, as you said, empathy or interpersonal communication or ability to understand where different people are coming from. Again, this is becoming a master skill, right? At senior levels, particularly those who are customer facing in your kind of product organization, understanding what the client or the customer experience will be, what are the problems which are unsolved, which maybe he or she also hasn't articulated. How do I, stay two steps ahead, joining the dots and creating, the next round of solutions. So that's a whole suite of skills, which, you know, part of that learning is by watching or by working with people who have that skills. And part of it is now HR and the organization's responsibility to first articulate, listen, the roles are changing.
Take-
Earlier roles are just not going to be there. So if you want
True.
career success, you're going to have to build yourself up very differently. But realistically, that will take time. It's not overnight. The role modeling can have results very quickly.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Thank you. Thank
Yeah,
you
if
so
I may
much.
add,
Yes,
Sheila,
please.
so rightly said, role modeling is the best thing. And how are they being told that it's not there? They need to improve upon this. So, is it only you or HR who knows it, or it's them who know it? It's very, very important. And I think coaching will play a very important role because it's very
Correct.
specific requirement. And when it comes to, it's part of executive presence, which is communication piece of executive presence. So for that, I think coaching would be a very important tool, but they must have skin in the game. So for that, again, go back and check how is feedback being imparted to these people, and how do they know that it's actually dragging them down. Forget about organization. Let's focus on them, and I think that would be a very quick win there.
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, we have started that first step of first making the leaders understand today. Communication has become one of the impediment for them. Are we consciously, so far we wouldn't have included that in the feedback, but today that's a need of the year are, and are we consciously putting that as a feedback? So far it was like overlooked. It's okay, he's a great techie guy, even if he doesn't communicate, it's fine. Now when the population of communication increased, that's when we started hitting the challenge. Lovely, thank you so much. The second question is more for my personal growth, is what I would like to hear from both of you with your experience. One thing, so I have close about 15 years of experience, and I have been learning and watching how the HR role itself has evolved. There's lot, we've become more niche, and it's like days were long, long back when anybody can play the role of HR. That's no more the case, right? Now, as I've grown up, I've come to a stage where I realize while the role has evolved, it's also become little in the market that pedigree, right? An MBA from a tier one institute becomes a very, very prominent thing in the CV. Right back then, when I completed masters in social work from Mera School of Social Work. Now, what I see that is kind of constraining the opportunities that personally I as a HR have. So I've always come into this dilemma: is it important that should I go ahead and enroll for an executive MBA, or what is it? I mean, I'm still confused. Haven't taken an real deep thought about it. If you both could help with your experience.
So here's what I would say, and I'd love to hear what you say as well, Gauri. I think if you have a genuine interest in learning, please go ahead and enroll. It will make some things easier than others because, yes, branding, it helps a little. I mean, it because many organizations are still fairly traditional. So, like what you said, sometimes when they go to a search consultant, they will say, "This job we only want people from whatever these four institutes or five institutes." So, the search consultant will only look there. So, if but don't do it just for that because otherwise it's going to be it's going to be a drag. Right? But if you're interested, that's certainly one thing to consider. But the other thing is, we're at this space where so much is changing in HR, and if you are at that cutting edge of, you know, being someone who's seen as understanding how the future is unfolding, and you can build that as like you are known for that. Because by the way, HR people are going to get dated very quickly now. With the world changing so fast, it's very easy to get
Absolutely.
dated because your ideas belong to 10 years ago. The world has moved somewhere else.
Yes.
Like, it's like, if we were to make movies in the same genre as we did 10 years ago, they don't succeed, right?
Mhm.
Nobody wants to watch them.
Yes.
They were so popular then, but today nobody goes for them. Same thing, people want something else today. So if you can, as an HR professional, if that's of interest to you, and I think this is true for anyone actually. If you're at the cutting edge, that you are one of those people who understands where we are at and can really help an organization move from 2022 onwards, not from 2010, because a lot of HR people are still stuck in 2010.
Right.
Actually, in 2022, understand where we are and can be part of that journey. I think that's a phenomenal skill to have. So, those are my suggestions.
Yeah, rightly
Sorry.
said. So yes, I think Shalti rightly said that there are traditional organizations. Sometimes I look at job descriptions and they say we are a diverse organization and we want people from this institute only who passed out in these years only, and we are a diverse and DNI is our priority. So yes, there are takers for this. There are people who are open-minded also, and they think maybe this will bring in diversity for us. So that is there, but like rightly said by Shalini, if you think you want to enhance your knowledge, definitely go for it. But yes, I don't think, and I'm sure Shalini will agree, that this will translate into a job offer immediately. That would not happen with executive programs, unless you go for a 1 year full-time program where it will happen, but for others it would not. But yes, I again agree with Shalini, because for my own journey also, I did my master's in psychology after 13 years of experience. Last year I did HR analytics, design thinking, and it's like continuous learning journey, picking up something which is coming up newly. And very recently I've taken a role in marketing also. So that is giving me a free
Nice.
access to business, and that is helping a lot to bring those business solutions, because we are a B2B organization. And if I have to go to large organizations meeting, it was like, what is HR doing here? But as marketing I can be anywhere. So I think Shalini already mentioned about this, that if you can
That's
pick
right.
up certain skills which can take you from 2022 moving forward, this would be really great. So you would have some opportunities within the organization where you can enhance your skills. And yes, the courses are excellent, and added to that, the networking that comes along with it is invaluable. So don't think about it much. If you want to learn more, these are some of the very good options.
Absolutely. Thank you. That really helps. Thank you so much. It was lovely talking to you both.
Thank you for
Thank you,
joining.
VS.
And congratulations on being the lucky winner.
Yeah,
Thank
congrats.
you. Thank you. Yes. Thanks to
Thank you so much.
VS.
And I would now invite Arnav back to close the session.
Thank you so much, Gauri. Thank you so much, Shalini. Firstly, a big thanks to Sheila for joining. That was absolutely brilliant. And for our other viewers, you will also get similar opportunities in our future sessions where you can interact with our speakers. Just have to reply to that mail, so watch out for it. And it was an absolute honor listening to your conversation, both of you. It was absolutely brilliant. Not even being an HR professional myself, I think I'm still a little future ready by this conversation. So I can only imagine what it must have done to the actual HR people who watched this. So it was absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much for taking out time for us and for giving your valuable time to our community members. I'd also like to give a big thank you to SHRM, who are our partners for this community. So, for our viewers, please be sure to join HR Acers. The team will put the link in the comment section right now. So, be sure to join because you really don't want to miss future sessions because we'll continue having brilliant speakers and much more insightful and brilliant sessions like this. So, with that, I would like to close this session. And once again, thank you so much, Shalini, and thank you so much, Gauri, for doing this for us. Great. Have a
Thank you
very
so
good
much.
evening, everybody.
Such a
Thank you.
pleasure. Thank
And we could not take up the questions which were there in the comments because of lack of time. But yes, I'm sure Shalini and I would go back and support it.
Right, Gauri, thank you for reminding me. My bad, I forgot. So we'll be taking your questions forward if you do want answers to them. So just please feel free to reach out and we'll connect with Shalini and Gauri and we can definitely give you their answers on this. So once again, thank you so much, everybody, for joining and see you in the next session.
Thank you. Thanks, Shalini.
you, Gauri. Thank you.
Bye.